So if you know anything about the brand Platinum, two pens are going to spring into your mind when you think about it. The first pen is probably going to be the Platinum 3776, and the other pen should be the Platinum Presidential. Why should they spring into your mind? Well, they're probably some of the better pens that you can buy in the fountain pen realm. So I've had the opportunity to use the Platinum 3776, and I really got to say, for the price, it's probably one of the better gold nibs out there. And it's rather fitting that a brand that makes really good high-end pens, it's rather fitting that when they make lower-end pens, they're going to be really, really good. The point in being is going to be the Platinum Preppy. So if you've heard anything about Platinum Preppies before, there are going to be two things that spring into your mind when you think about them. The first thing that's going to spring into your mind is they are cheap, mass-produced, and pretty damn good. And I gotta say, I couldn't agree more. This is a really cheap pen that you can pick up, use. Well, anyone should be able to use it. You should be able to throw it in your bag, pull it out, and it will work well. And when I say cheap, I really do mean cheap. In the fountain pen community, people throw around cheap pens, say Lamy Safaris and Pilot Metropolitans, and yes, they are relatively cheap. A Lamy Safari will set you back about 50 Australian dollars. Pilot Metros are about 40 Australian dollars. The Platinum Preppy was only $7, and I gotta say, for $7, you can get a pen that in some aspects will outperform both those pens. Why? I'll talk about it later. I'll also mention that for those $7, you're going to get the pen, and you're also going to get one Platinum proprietary cartridge. Now, this will last you about a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending how often you use it. And unfortunately, there is no converter that comes with it. In fact, Platinum don't sell a converter that's made specifically for the Preppy. What you're going to have to do is buy a aftermarket converter that will fit the Platinum Preppy, or buy a higher price Platinum pen that will fit the Platinum Preppy. Those converters are going to be a bit expensive. I believe a Chinese converter off eBay should cost you about $5. I've seen proper Platinum converters for about $15 on eBay. So your other alternative is to buy Platinum cartridges, and they'll cost you about $8 for 10, which if you use this pen a lot isn't going to be all that cheap. So the other thing that people will first think of when they think about Platinum Preppies is these pens can be converted into eyedropper pens, which is you put ink in the rear of the pen and they'll give you a giant capacity. And this is probably what these pens are famous for. You can eyedropper these pens, and it'll be a lot cheaper than buying Platinum proprietary converters. And I gotta say, they are pretty high capacity. Let's get into the video. Alright, let's go into some of the specs as always. So capped, you're looking at a pen that's about 13.9 centimeters long. Uncapped, it shrinks to about 12.1 centimeters, and it posts to make a pen that's about 15.1 centimeters long. So with those dimensions, when you hold that when it's not posted, it's not going to be too short that that's not going to be uncomfortable, but it is not a big pen. However, when you add the cap and post it, it does make a pretty long pen. 15.1 centimeters, that should be big enough for everyone. Now, when you do post it, it is going to add a tiny bit of weight to the pen. Uncapped, you're looking at a weight that's about 8 grams, and when you cap it, you're going to add about 4 grams, bringing it up to a total of 12 grams. So either way that you look at it, this is a pretty light pen. And for those of you who know me, don't know me, I don't like light pens. Things such as the Pilot 78G, they are light pens and I'm not a big fan of them. But this pen just seems to get away with it because it has a very light and springy nib. And when you have a light and springy nib on a light pen, that's not the worst thing in the world because you can just write really fast without pushing down, well, without the help of the weight of the pen pushing down. So this is probably one of the few exceptions because pens such as the Pilots have very stiff nibs. It does make it a bit awkward when you have a light pen that isn't very flexible. It's just a little bit uncomfortable. Now the grip is something that I should mention. It's a very straight grip, and the grip is very similar to grips found on, say, the Uniball Insights. And to be fair, it writes very, very similar to a Uniball Insight. You'd hold it the same way, same grip and everything. So if you're someone that loves these Uniball rollerball pens or something similar and isn't used to using fountain pens or is using fountain pens in addition to these pens, I think it'll be very, very familiar to you and very comfortable. I know that there are a lot of fountain pen grips that some people love, some people hate, but I think it would be very hard for you to hate this grip unless you had ginormous hands and hated the shit out of this grip. So this is also a clear body design. This is a demonstrator pen. You can see the ink in the feed. For some reason the ink doesn't go all the way down. I have tried priming the feed. That doesn't do anything. It just comes down to this level and stops. If you see that on your pen, know your pen's not running dry. It will write perfectly. It just doesn't go down. So this is a demonstrator pen. You'll be able to see the cartridge in here, which is really odd because if this is a demonstrator pen, why the hell has Platinum gone ahead and ruined it with all this? They've written Preppy, they've written some warning label or something, and they put a fucking barcode here, and they've ruined it. And it's not like you can take it off. These are printed on, and it's bloody ugly. So if you want a beautiful pen as a demonstrator, don't go for this one. However, that being said, it is a demonstrator pen, so when you do inevitably eyedropper this pen, you will be able to see the ink level all the way down here. Which brings me on to it. That was a terrible. Yeah. Which brings me on to it being an eyedropper pen. This is an all plastic pen, and don't let that deter you. It is incredibly sturdy. Like all these threads and everything, I wouldn't dream of these breaking easily. It is all plastic, which means you can put some silicone grease along here, put an O-ring along here, and just drop some ink into here for a pretty big capacity pen. If you were to eyedropper this pen, you'd have a pen that should last you quite a long time. This is a fine nib, so it could probably last you 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks, depending on how much you use this pen. I would love to make this an eyedropper pen, and I probably will. Alright then, let's talk about the nib. So this pen comes in about 3 sizes. Those sizes are going to be a 0.2 extra fine, a 0.3 fine, which this pen is, and a 0.5 medium. So they are going to be stainless steel nibs, and they are going to be very quickly made. The design of the nib is pretty evident. It's made from a punched out piece of stainless steel that have been bent about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times and just shoved on the front of the pen. So it is a very, very basic design. It looks very similar to a Lamy style pen. The only difference is it says, well, it has a P, the Preppy logo, or the Platinum logo, and for some reason they have not punched out the circle, the relief hole on the nib, which I find a little bit weird. Now, That being said, it is a very, very good nib. This is a fine, and anyone who has used fine nibs will know that fines can be very, very scratching. There's very little tipping material. They can dig into low quality paper, and if you have a really shit pen, they will probably tear up the paper. This pen, however, with a mass-produced fine nib, is really smooth. And I gotta say, it's so damn smooth. In fact, it outperforms pens that are 10 times the price. It outperforms the Pilot Prera that has a fine nib on it. And I really got to say, for a pen that only costs $7, I got to say it is amazing. Even when you just write with it compared to other fine nibs, the amount of scratch, the noise that the scratch makes, it's so much quieter. However, on the flip side, you're not going to get line variation out of this pen, and I would urge you, if you get one of these pens, don't try and prove me wrong. Seriously, I have almost broken this pen trying to see how much line variation there is, because for some reason, if you push really hard down on this pen, and when I say really hard, I mean to an extent that most fountain pens should be able to handle, this pen just bends. I pushed down moderately hard, and the nib, when I pulled it back and had a look, it was sort of pointing upwards at the end, which was bad, I gotta say. Thankfully, I was able to bend it back into position, but I really gotta say, this pen really bends under small amounts of pressure. However, that being said, bending under a little amount of pressure is not the worst thing in the world. Because it does that, it is a very light pen to use, and it will write under a small amount of pressure. And as I said before, it's a very light pen. So those two factors are pretty good when combined together. As I said, it's a very similar weight to a uniball pen, and the writing experience will be somewhat similar. If you like fountain pens, you'll probably say the fountain pen has a nicer writing experience. If you like uniballs, you'll say that has a nicer experience. As well as that, this pen does not skip or hard start ever. I've had two of these pens. This is the second one, and this pen doesn't hard skip. That could probably be down to the feed, because I gotta say the feed is pretty good in this pen. It's nice and wet. Well, for a fine nib, by fine nib standards, it's nice and wet. It's not going to soak through cheap, low quality paper. That being said, it's not overly wet. You're not going to gush. Okay, you join me for probably one of the first writing samples that I've done live. So we have the Platinum Preppy. So this is the 0.3 fine. Yeah, so 0.3 fine nib. So the ink that we're using is the Platinum proprietary cartridge. So okay, let's try a sample. So, though I've got to say, just listen when I'm doing it, because it is incredibly smooth for a fine nib. Really got to press that. So. Well, there you go. So nib line variation. So 1, 2, 3. So on the side strokes, they will be a tiny bit thinner, as you can see, a little bit thinner. So I don't want to break the nib, but that's no pressure, and that's probably as much pressure as I dare give it, and they're about the same. Maybe this one's a tiny bit thicker, but you get my point. There's not going to be much line variation. If you do, or whatever these are called, you're not going to get much. It's going to be about the same. Let's test wetness. So as I said, it's going to be wet for a fine nib, not a wet pen in general, but considering a lot of fine nib pens that I have are pretty much dry, that's alright by me. Okay, so what do I like about it? Well, first of all, you can eyedropper this pen. I think eyedroppers are great. I've eyedroppered the 78G before, and I am yet to eyedropper this pen. I'm just waiting for an O-ring to come for it. I think pens that you can eyedropper, even at this low price, is good, considering that the cartridges are a bit of a waste of money, and buying a converter I don't see worth it. I think that the option to eyedropper this pen is pretty damn amazing, considering the capacity that you will get from it. I think it's cool that this is a pen that can be considered a disposable fountain pen, which you can also reuse. I'm not a big fan of disposable pens. I like cheap pens that, you know, if you lose or anything, you wouldn't be pissed off, but I think it's nice that they've given you the option to refill this pen. Pilot. I think it's also good for people that are using rollable pens, as I said, very similar grip to this one. I think it's easy for them to transition over to these pens or use it in addition to those pens. And I'd also like to say that this pen is pretty amazing for a fine nib. Fine nibs usually tear up paper or are incredibly scratchy. So what do I not like about it? Well, obviously, I think these stickers that they put on it is incredibly ugly for a demonstrator pen. I think it's a stupid decision. I wish they would peel off stickers. I don't know who approved it to be printed on. I just find that pretty disappointing for a demonstrator pen. Also pretty disappointing that there is no dedicated converter for this. Well, I'm guessing, well, obviously it's part of their marketing so they can gouge you for, what do you call them, cartridges, once the first one's finished, but I just find it really annoying that there's no dedicated, never mind. And I also find it pretty disappointing that it's so easy to bend the nib, considering that, well, it's a fountain pen, its job is to be bent. And seeing how I didn't push it all that far, apparently it was too much for it. So there you go.